to the point where actually in the cube competition, we'd seen this from the cube originators in France, and I almost didn't believe it. And then we did some analysis of the results from our pilot project, and we realized that actually, so the average savings I think was 17% across all our buildings. Those that were actually certified was 22%. So it was actually higher than the other buildings. So there is room for improvement in all buildings, that's for sure.
We were on the road last episode and now back in Berlin. I've come down with a bit of a cold, so apologies for the sniffles and a little bit of a rough voice. Nonetheless, welcome to the Smartery podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Gifford. And we're staying at home this week, which is increasingly becoming an important unit in the energy transition. Residential rooftop solar is already very well established in regions like Europe, in parts of Asia and the United States. And with the addition of home batteries, individual households' ability to supply themselves with clean energy is rapidly changing. But to really push levels of self-sufficiency and the intelligent ways these systems can interact with the electricity network requires interoperability between home devices, control, and intelligence. And thankfully, smart software and Internet of Things devices are delivering precisely these capabilities. We also mustn't forget commercial buildings, and we'll get to some fascinating insights into how behavioral change can deliver huge energy efficiency gains in office buildings with insights from the Cube competition in the UK in my second interview today. So stick around for that. But first, this episode is powered by Pioneercraft, the only provider combining energy sharing with smart supplementary power. With Pioneercraft, solar energy in multi-family homes with up to 20 units is shared exactly where it's needed and made truly profitable. No red tape, just clean energy. Discover more at pioneercraft.de, and that's craft with a K. My first guest today is from a company that provides both software and hardware to help manage distributed energy assets, both within a single household and also in terms of how that home interacts with the grid. Irene Guerra Gil is an energy market expert with gridX. Irene, thanks so much for joining the Smartery podcast today.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me.
Now, as I understand it, when we're talking about smart home energy management, one of the key hurdles has always been how the different devices kind of talk to each other, whether that's on the generation side, solar and batteries, things like EV chargers, but then also loads within the home, getting them all to kind of orchestrate together or sing in tune and communicate to each other. What can you tell me about the latest in terms of how easy that is or difficult that is, or what progress is being made?
Yes, so I think that also has to do a lot with the fact that HEMS is a relatively young technology, right? I think as it's getting more mature, the connectivity between assets and how they talk to each other is getting better and better. And this also has to do with the fact that, controllable assets are also booming, right? So the installation of controllable assets is more and more common. For example, there's a type of connection that's called plug and play solution, which is getting quite a name right now in the industry, and it's starting to emerge to show how easy it could be to just plug in a HEMS device and start already with the optimization of the household. In fact, gridX also launched a plug and play solution with one OEM thanks to a program that we have with OEMs called Ready for gridX, which basically ensures that the connectivity and the talking between assets is going to be long-term really good and long-term partnership agreements. But yeah, I think that in a nutshell summarizes the trends right now and where we are heading with HEMS communication.
Well, and I actually did see some figures, some research that was looking at kind of these connected devices. So this is kind of the whole area that's known as the Internet of Things. And it was really projecting extremely fast uptake kind of through to 2029. I think like this isn't only energy, though. People are talking about other kind of systems within the home. Is that right?
Yes, so the figures that I know have to do with, like, of course, HEMS installations have to do with energy resources installed in a household. That would include, for example, heat pumps with the electrified heat pumps for heat. It would include EV chargers. It would include PV, rooftop PV, and batteries, right? So that's what we call smart energy devices, so to speak, and that's also included there.
Okay, but it can also mean things like security, even how people have like their music systems. Is this kind of all captured into connected devices, Internet of Things?
I actually am not sure about that. I would say yes, because Internet of Things, of course, englobes everything, right? And those kind of things could also be included.
Okay. Well, the most impactful, definitely from our side, is energy, right? And it's really exciting what you can actually do with home energy management systems, intelligent systems within the home. In terms of getting devices to communicate to each other, and as you said, these kind of plug and play solutions are becoming more common. What kind of role does regulation play? Because I imagine there's an incentive for the device providers to kind of lock you into their system. They want you to have all the devices from the one manufacturer. Do regulations come into it?
Yes, definitely, and especially also regarding HEMS, right? If we talk about home energy management systems, that is starting to be more and more regulated by the EU, for example, where they are trying to push the systems to be, let's say, interoperable, fair for end customers, and secure. Also, like cybersecurity is a big thing, and all of this is all, of course, reflected in the regulation. One regulation that comes to my mind would be like the electricity market design reform that is also trying to address all of these problems. And I would say, especially in Germany, it's particularly important because I think in Germany, everything tends to be very regulated, let's say it that way. And HEMS have been also very regulated and pushed from regulatory perspective. Um, not only HEMS, also controllable consumption devices. So the devices that we were speaking about being heat pumps, EV chargers, rooftop PV, batteries. There's one regulation in Germany specifically, which is called the 14A, which requires, for example, a HEMS system or controllable device to be so to use the HEMS to control this controllable device, so the DSO can kind of change the consumption when there's grid problems. So this is, of course, has to do is very intertwined with regulation.
Okay, so that's in terms of giving a third party, in this case the the system operator or the network
Exactly.
operator, and what about in terms of compelling kind of manufacturers to open up their protocols? Is there any legislation in that to that aim in Europe?
I think manufacturers, for example, I what I know would be in regards of the tariff, what's called tariff agnostic approach, which means that, for example, HEM systems shouldn't be just focusing in one specific tariff offered by one specific supplier, but they should be open so competition is fair across the industry and the end consumers can opt to different tariffs and the supplier that they want to choose, basically. So this is something that is also being promoted in a sense, also in hardware, right, and also in software.
Okay, and just gridX itself, your position in the market in terms of HEMS is providing both hardware that the homeowner can install, a kind of plug and play device like you were talking about, and then the software platform itself, which kind
Exactly.
of can intelligently manage these devices. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So we are what we call software and platform as a service. So that means that we provide the software behind the HEMS system, right? We provide the whole platform to manage it. We provide data flows and so on, but also hardware when it's needed. We call that a local gateway, which is a little grid box that you install in the household. And that, of course, helps to have better control of the assets, durability, and so on, but also cloud to cloud connection. So we do both. We have the what's called the hybrid approach.
Okay, and then so your customers aren't so much the homeowner, but kind of third party providers. So
Exactly,
people like
B2B.
utilities or even the hardware providers. I saw that gridX recently entered into a deal with GoodWe, so a pretty well known manufacturer of power electronics. So your system can kind of plug into their hardware.
Exactly. So that's the plug and play solutions that we were talking about, right? That's what we launched with GoodWe. And we basically have a B2B approach, meaning that our customers are basically either suppliers on the other side, or OEMs, as you mentioned. With OEMs, we have what's called this Ready for GridX program, which yeah, that's basically the long-term agreement that you can get with OEMs.
Okay, well, let's take a step back to legislation. You mentioned a little bit about Germany being quite well regulated, as many of us know, but also a bit of a leader in the space. What about elsewhere in Europe, looking to some of the kind of big electrification markets or big distributed energy markets? I'm thinking Spain or the Netherlands.
Yes, so I mean everything that has to do with the EU is of course regulated with EU regulation that then is of course
It has to
translated
trickle
into
down.
national
Yeah.
international law exactly. So there, Germany is also quite similar to other countries, like for example, I would say Netherlands or yeah, Spain even in some cases. Of course, there's differences. And another really electrified country which is starting to boom or is already booming since a few years would be UK, where we see there also lots of DERs, what we call distributed energy resources booming, especially rooftop PV also. And I think it's a really interesting country.
And then I mentioned in the introduction, and you actually spoke about how DSOs in Germany require the kind of access to home energy management systems. There can be payoffs for a smart management system like this, not only for the homeowner in terms of optimizing their kind of energy consumption within the home, but also for the grid. Can you explain how some of those benefits kind of play out?
Yeah, so I think actually this is a really key point on why HEMS systems are booming at the moment also and being actively promoted by legislation. And that's also what we're starting to hear the whole world flexibility right now in the industry, right? And this is the fact that HEMS systems don't only reduce the costs for prosumers, as we call our end consumers, but also benefit the electricity system as a whole. And this is by allowing, for example, all of this for energy resources to be pooled together and then used for what's called balancing services by the system operators, or can be traded into the market and then is of course beneficial for the whole electricity system and so on, right? So I think the savings can, we could say, go across the whole value chain, which is what's really interesting about HEMS.
Yeah. Okay. So saving the individual homeowner, delivering savings to them, but also delivering on a network level. How does that interact with dynamic tariffs and time of use tariffs? Because we're
Yeah.
starting to see them becoming much more common in Europe.
Yes, so basically, dynamic tariffs would be providing what we call system level savings, what we call system level advantages. That means that you optimize that household on based of this dynamic tariff that you have with your supplier. Dynamic tariff normally reflect what we call the electricity prices. Electricity prices are on the day ahead market, and this reflects the supply and demand status of at that delivery period. So we think that this is of course really interesting because you're using your household in a sense to use electricity when it's there and when it's offered, and maybe self-consume and use other electricity resources when there's no electricity in the grid and there's problems of supply and demand.
Mhm. And when we look at individual devices within the home or sources of load, I imagine the heat pump, as you've mentioned, but also EVs are two kind of crucial ones in terms of how you can balance that with supply and also balance that with signals that are coming from the grid, whether they're direct signals from the DSO or also price signals through dynamic tariffs, as you said. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I think maybe we can distinguish between two types of flexibility here to give a bit more clarity to the here also the people who hear us. So implicit flexibility, that would be when the household and the HEMS optimizes based on a price signal, what you just mentioned. This price signal is, for example, a dynamic tariff. Explicit flexibility, on the other hand, that would be when you react to a third-party signal, which is the first part that you mentioned. And that would be, for example, DSOs, that would be trading desks, that would be all of these kind of things. And though that is normally when you aggregate not only one household, but lots of households together to make a flexibility pool. And that flexibility pool is then traded into the market or used for balancing.
And when we're talking about aggregating assets in this way, we're getting into the area of VPPs, virtual power plants. Now, I remember first kind of reading about virtual power plants maybe 12 years ago or something, and I thought this is a fantastic idea to be able to bring together these assets and operate them, just like the gas peaker plant that's on the edge of the city, or the big generator, the big polluting generator down the road. The uptake has been pretty slow, though, I would say. Would you agree with that? And also, why is that the case?
So that's a really good question. And I think it has to do with the fact of a simplicity for end users. I think when you offer a dynamic tariff to end users and they see the price to with which you are reacting or optimizing, that's really easy to understand. Because you have transparency of the data, right? And you can see the prices. When you're talking about virtual power plants, and you're talking about a third party having direct control over your assets for that flexibility, that can get a bit more tricky. So I think what we need to do to kind of roll out these solutions and make sure that virtual power plants become state of the art in the future is to offer simplicity to the end consumers so that the end consumers can really understand what's going on, what's being offered by the supplier, how the supplier is using their asset to benefit whom, and with what savings.
And do you get the feeling that with EVs becoming more commonplace, with the introduction of dynamic tariffs, that do you expect to see an acceleration in VPP uptake? Those are the baseline settings. And then, as you say, if there's simplicity, if there's trust in the platforms are built by the providers, that VPPs could really accelerate quite quickly.
Yes, definitely. I think also with the electrification of the system in general, we are heading into a place where flexibility is going to become crucial. Flexibility also entails virtual power plants and entails the use of that flexibility in the markets. And I think that's precisely where we're heading to. But also, I think that we need the infrastructure to get there. And that is sometimes lacking. And for example, in Germany, we have a huge problem with smart meter rollouts in households. And of course, you need a smart meter rollout to be able to participate in a virtual power plant. Of course, you need this type of smart infrastructure in the grid, which could maybe trigger a bigger and more quick rollout in the future.
Okay, and to accelerate smart meter rollout, it might be a case of just kind of demonstrating to people these are the benefits that you're kind of leaving on the table through not participating in these kind of programs, because smart meters can be added retrospectively to homes, that technically it shouldn't be a big hurdle, right?
Yes, but the thing here is that everything is regulated in Germany, also the smart meter rollout, which means that that depends a lot on regulation, depends a lot on the DSOs and what they call the MSBs, right? The metering point operators, to be able to install that and test it in each household, which is getting complicated also because of data security problems, data protection, and EU regulation also.
And in Germany, there's quite a lot of different DSOs to deal with.
Exactly. There's more than 860.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, looking elsewhere in Europe, how is smart meter rollout to kind of facilitate VPPs and also smart home energy management systems?
So that there's countries which have a much more advanced smart meter rollout. For example, Spain is looking at 100% smart meter rollout at the moment. Also, Netherlands, I think it's more than 90% already. UK more than 80%, if I remember correctly. So I think it depends a lot on the country. And there's definitely countries that are more advanced in this. Also, I have to say, and I have to mention that the German solution has nothing to do with other solutions. So the German solution that they propose as a smart meter is much more complex and much more advanced in a way in comparison to what other countries have already installed.
Okay. So not all smart meters are the same.
No, no,
Wow.
because what you say smart meter, you could only understand maybe a digital meter that just reads every hour or so. The solution that Germany is looking at is digital meter which reads every 15 minutes and sends the data, and also has what they call a control box, which means that this control box can be used by system operators to steer the assets.
Okay, interesting. Like a really high level of controllability and
Yeah.
also granularity in terms of the data. Actually, that brings to mind cybersecurity, which you mentioned once before. How important do you think that will be in terms of seeing a wider rollout of these systems?
It's going to be really important. There's actually this EU Act, which is called the EU Cybersecurity Act, which is going to be very important, not only for HAMS, for all kind of Internet of Things that we mentioned. But yeah, I think cybersecurity measures are being more and more restricted, more and more advanced. We are kind of understanding what the consequences could be of having cybersecurity fallout, and this is being pushed a lot in the EU at the moment.
Okay, and also amongst homeowners as well, I imagine.
Yes, definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. So homeowners also want to have a solution that is cyber secure for their own safety, of course.
sure. Okay, well, turning to the homeowner then, I'm familiar with the phrase consumer, of course, that's been out forever. Then we were talking a lot about prosumers. I understand that gridX is introducing another term or part of the movement to introduce another term, flexumer. So this is really aiming in at this ability to be a part of the kind of flexibility solution that the
Exactly.
energy transition needs.
Exactly. So yeah, we do love the word flex-humor, and we have been using it quite a lot. So for us, it's actually like a clear next step to prosumer. So we've heard the word prosumer for a while in the industry, as you mentioned, which defines basically end consumers that have controllable consumption devices. That could be rooftop PV, that could be heat pump, that could be EV charging station. And when you control these assets, when you control these systems based on flexibility markets, like for trading purposes in the wholesale markets, or for balancing, or even for grid congestion if it's controlled by the DSO system operator, then we define that as flexumers. So one step ahead.
Okay. And there's a lot of complexity here. I've got to say, like, there's a lot of moving parts. There's legislation, there's technology, there's winning consumer trust. Um, how confident are you that smart home energy management systems, the uptake is going to accelerate? And why do you think that?
I think it has to be directly correlated with the fact that we are heading into electrification, and we are seeing a boom of controllable consumption devices, right? So these devices that require so much electricity, that because of course EV charging stations, you're going to charge your car every day, you're going to use the heat pump every day. Um, that requires a high demand. This high demand has to be somehow steered, somehow orchestrated, so that it doesn't put strain onto the grid, and we have still grid stability. And all of this is heading into the direction of flexibility. So that's why we think smart home energy management systems are really necessary to intelligently control all of this demand and intelligently orchestrate all of the demand and electricity that's going to be used in the future.
And deliver value to homeowners as well, or
Exactly.
flexumers.
Exactly, exactly. So all of this has a savings potential, and all of this is, of course, beneficial for the end consumer, because at the end of the day, they're going to see their electricity bill to be reduced, which is what they're looking for.
Well, it is an exciting space, and thank you very much for stopping by to explain some of the finer details to me today on the Smartery podcast. Irene Guerra Gil, energy market expert with gridX. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was a pleasure.
It's a pretty well-known adage that the cleanest and cheapest electrons are the ones that you don't use. And while intelligent energy management systems are becoming increasingly proficient in making use of clean electrons in the home or business, there are still plenty that are being wasted. My next guest has led an initiative in the UK that's finding ingenious ways to tackle what may be one of the least sexy challenges in the energy transition, incentivizing energy efficiency in office buildings. Mark Bruno is a partner at Ampersand Partners and the chief ambassador of the Cube competition. And he joins me on the Smartery podcast today. Now, Mark, take us through, what have you achieved with the Cube competition in the UK?
Good morning, Jono. Thanks for having me on. Well, let's start by putting things in context a little bit. 39% of global carbon emissions come from the real estate sector. Of those, a third come from operational use of the buildings themselves. So, we're starting from a large starting point already. Of that energy used for those buildings, 30% is estimated to be wasted, right? So that's the starting point. Tons of energy is being wasted in commercial buildings. With that said, I'll go straight into the results we achieved in our last annual competition. So we achieved a 17% energy savings across all the participants in our buildings. We had in the UK, we had about 500,000 square meters taking part. And to put that in context, I'm sure most of your listeners kind of know the price of energy, but for the UK, that amounted to about £8 million. So a big chunk of money. That was actually only from 30 buildings, but you can see, pretty impressive. And some of the buildings even made up to like 39% savings. So pretty significant, especially if you can imagine you can scale that up, to many more buildings.
Yeah, and I might have been a little bit unkind in saying that, energy savings in office buildings is less than sexy. But how did you go about making those savings?
You know what? You're absolutely right. It's not sexy at all, which is part of the reason you need to do something sexy, which is gamify the whole process, right? As soon as you throw the word gamification, people are like, oh, okay, I understand that a little bit. Once again, to put that in context, I think if you're looking at a building, there's a pathway or a journey you can go on, 3 different things you need to do to help its energy efficiency, right? First is dealing with user behavior. Second is around the actual building operation itself, energy management systems, smart systems, that sort of thing. And the third thing is the building envelope itself, right? Insulation, putting PV on the roof, larger, more capex intensive measures. But the first always has to start with people in the building itself, right? And the user behavior. More on that in a second, but historically, changing behavior is incredibly difficult. You can't just ask someone to do it once and it changes, right? It takes time, which is why our competition takes part over a year period, because it takes time to embed that sort of behavior. And in terms of the actual savings we're making, I would say you put them into 2 different buckets. One are around user behavior and the others around operational management. It could be as simple as resetting your building management system, your BMS, right? There are many parts of the building that will have night loads are excessively high because all the elevators are on at night. Lifts all working when they don't need to be. Parts of the building that are heated that don't need to be heated. Lights that are on, all that sort of thing. And then also simple things, more technical, building pumps cycling every night when they only need to be done once a week. And people don't necessarily kind of realize this. So it's a combination of dealing with the people in the building. And once again, I'll touch on this a little bit later on. And then also making an effort to try and actually understand how the building is using energy and trying to mitigate that.
Well, I guess you've got kind of different groups of people then that you're dealing with, right? So when it's like the big operational stuff, like turning elevators on and off in the wee hours of the morning or something like that, then you're talking to the building management teams. These are the kind of techie guys, the organizational guys that kind of run that stuff. And then another part is the people that use the building, the office workers. I imagine like dealing with those different groups is quite different, right? They have different priorities, interests, and also just kind of different types of people.
You hit the nail on the head there. I think the 2 points you just brought up, one's communication, and the other is kind of split incentives, if you will, right? So this is traditional challenge in real estate. Which is why no one's really done anything about this before. Historically, there's always been a top-down approach, right? Whoever the building manager is does his work. No one really sees it. It is what it is. And in fact, there are lots of different people involved, right? There are property managers, the building managers, tenants, as you said, the owners. There's this split incentives issues where the landlord will own the building and pay for the energy, but it's a tenant that ends up using it, right? So there's no incentive for the tenant to necessarily do anything about it. Obviously, arrangements vary, but that's typically what it is. Lack of communications as well. Very rarely do you get all 5 of these people in a room talking together. So as much as anything else, what we try to do is shine a light on the problem and get everyone in the room, at least at the beginning, to figure out, yes, this is what we want to do. You get buy-in from the management. And then kind of the most important thing is turning it into a grassroots operation, right? So you got the tenants who are there in the building all the time. They know the parts of the building that are too hot, too cold. They know the lifts that are not running. They know when the lights are on, late at night or whatever else, right? So you need their feedback. And it turns out that, very often you get natural champions within the tenants who actually want to do something about it. We started this in the UK during COVID. And here we're masters of our own small domain, right? I can just turn a little thermostat. I can control the heat in my room, and it's amazing power. People then returned to the office and they didn't have that same sense of agency, right? So you found that more people wanted to get involved and controlled. So what the Cube competition tries to do is we try to empower them to do that. And we do that by creating green teams. Some more and more buildings have green teams in place now, but it's still in the minority, right? And the idea being that you get representatives from different parts of the organization. It's not just the operations or the energy people. You literally get someone who's good at comms, someone who's good at marketing, because you need to communicate what you're doing throughout the building and even to the rest of a building's portfolio. And that's really the core of how Cube works. You create these teams, and then over the course of the year, you have different challenges you try to meet, and you work with that team, and you're pitting yourself against all the other buildings in the competition. So, you can see the leaderboard. We actually, interestingly, psychologically, it's not good to show the whole leaderboard because it disincentivizes someone if they see they're at the bottom. So you just show the top performers, and that depends on how many are taking place. And that gives someone incentive. It's, they saved this much last month. Maybe I can beat them. Let's try harder. Let's try doing this. And then it's also the communication, right? So we set up collaborative meetings kind of on a quarterly basis, either in person or, increasingly online as buildings are more disparate. And people can share ideas with each other, because the other thing is building managers are so busy all the time that they don't have time to talk to anyone and see what best practice is. So all of a sudden you're talking to other building managers, and sure, they may have some of the same ideas, but ultimately they'll end up having some new ideas and go, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, maybe I should lag the pipes in in every room or whatever it's going to be. Or my server room is still at 12 degrees. It can probably be at 22 degrees now because tech has changed. I mean, little ideas like that you get over time. Probably the stat we're proudest of, though, is these green teams. When they form, in 90% of cases, they stay together beyond the competition, and then they go on to tackle other problems in the building, be it water, waste, whatever else. So they've actually created something positive for the building.
Yeah, and I imagine you could, incentivize like the green team becomes a kind of cohesive group as well. Like they can maybe use some of the savings you're in the UK to go to the pub afterwards or something like that.
That's exactly it, right? And they'll do. I mean, it's about visibility as well, because just having the green team involved is fine. But if you've got thousands of people in the building, how do they get to know about it as well? So we try and we don't tell people what to do. We give them ideas, because every building's going to have a different culture, right? If you go to a bank, you're not going to have people running around in sweatsuits telling people to use the stairs necessarily. But we've had everything from. Do you know what a blender bike is?
No.
So it's a pedal powered bike with a blender on the front. So you're literally making smoothies for people, and you're like, see how much energy it takes to make your own smoothie. Here's a smoothie. Go run up the stairs to your office, right? Just to give people an idea and a bit of an incentive. So try and make it fun, because let's face it. You started off this question. It's not sexy. It's incredibly boring for most people, right? How do you make it fun and a little bit of sexy? And it's that positive reinforcement every month, going, this is how much you're saving, this is how you're doing, this is what you're doing to save the planet. It can be incredibly empowering if it's done properly.
Well, it's interesting also that you said that how people's kind of mindset changed a little bit after COVID. They were thinking about their built environment, the space they were in, a little bit differently. I think in clean tech, solar and batteries and smart grids and these kind of things, we can kind of think technology is the solution to everything, right? So why is it that behavior is just so crucial in the energy efficiency story?
I think it's for those reasons, I just gave you, right? Ultimately, everything comes down to people. And people are going to be at the core things. They're the ones making decisions, about what happens in the building. So it is, you need to engage them first. And you need to engage them in a way, as I said, that's fun, that's collaborative, that's going to stick with them, so that they can then work as a collective to improve the building, really.
Yeah, well, you mentioned kind of the building envelope as well. We have these certification systems like BREEAM, I understand, is the one in the UK. LEED is another one that from the US that's also well known, and there's a kind of a bit of a patchwork of them all over the world. How much can these already efficient buildings then become more efficient and realize more energy savings?
Listen, all of those are great, and I'm glad they exist. Most of them are for building design rather than use, and there's a massive difference. As I mentioned in the beginning, a third of the waste comes through operational use, right? Um, Once a building is designed, that's kind of it. You can't make major changes to it. So, in fact, there is very little, almost zero correlation between design and use, to the point where you see a lot of buildings that it's like, oh, it's a brilliant design building. It doesn't matter how we use it, and people, well, one of two things happens. These buildings, the between kind of when they finish building and when they're actually commissioned, there's a period of time. There's very often a disconnect. The tenants aren't involved, right? So the tenants don't know how the building works and how they should use it. And so therefore they end up misusing it, or at least not using it in the way that the architect, who's very remote from the whole process, intended it to be used. And there are countless examples of how that's the case. Windows that can't be opened, and then people going, trying to cut corners around that, and then it ends up throwing the whole system off, right, and the balance off. And BMSs that are so complicated, building management systems, that you end up having to hire expensive external consultants to be actually make any changes to the temperature settings, and so therefore they're just not made, right? It doesn't happen. So I think it's key to actually look at operations, and there are some new accreditations. There's actually one from Australia called Neighbours. I don't know if you're familiar with it. That big in Australia, launched here in the UK a couple of years ago, and it's starting to gain some traction as well. And it's literally looking at kind of operational efficiency in buildings, of which behavioral change plays a part, clearly. So how do you go about doing that? Because otherwise, building designs, the building design certifications are not a great mark of how much energy a building uses, to the point where actually in the cube competition, we'd seen this from the cube originators in France, and I almost didn't believe it. And then we did some analysis of the results from our pilot project, and we realized that actually, so the average savings, I think, was 17% across all our buildings. Those that were actually certified was 22%. So it was actually higher than the other buildings. So there is room for improvement in all buildings, that's for sure.
Yeah, okay. So the certified, the efficient buildings, even though the settings, their baseline settings were better, you can still do more
Yes.
through kind of bridging operations with design and functionality.
And sometimes it's simple as, so one example, we had one of the largest skyscrapers in London taking part, 37 floors, almost as many tenants, almost as many leases, right? And in each lease, they have temperatures. What are the temperature range for the building? What's the temperature range for the hot water? Regardless of, the operating systems can only set it to a set temperature, right? Which is, okay, this is what the leases say. This is what I'm going to set it to for the building. In order to reduce that, no one is going to talk to, all the tenants and then all their lawyers to say, oh, do you mind if we actually reduce the temperature by 2 or 3 degrees? Because it's not going to make a huge difference, in terms of the hot water, right? It's only through a behavioral change program where you can actually go, listen, this is what we're trying to do collectively for the building. Do you mind if we give this a go without going through the lawyers? And they'll go, yeah, that's fine. Let's do that, right? So once again, behavior change and operations completely separate from building design, right? Because that conversation hasn't been had with all 37 tenants before. So that's kind of the key part of this. It's kind of get engaged, have that conversation and move forward, not try to do things in isolation. Not that you shouldn't do things in isolation. You should do them both collectively, right? There's a space for tech, there's a space for kind of behavioral change.
Yeah, all of the above. And I'm not
Yeah.
surprised that like bypassing the lawyers
Yes,
can kind of
exactly.
fast track things.
Yeah.
Now, the cube competition itself, you're in the UK. You mentioned it originally comes from France. Can you just give me a little bit of background on it?
Yeah, so I mean, it started over a decade ago. France is actually incredibly progressive when it comes to energy efficiency. They introduced some regulation those number of years ago, and so the way it started is some of the largest building owners in I think it was Paris got together and said, "Listen, how do we get ahead of this curve? Because otherwise, we're going to be slapped with lots of fines." So they came up with the idea. They realized that you're going to have to engage people. And after doing some research, realized gamification is the best way of doing that. So it's been running there, started just with those 4 buildings portfolios, and it's grown and grown over the years. They've had about 5,000 kind of commercial buildings go through it over the years. But they also have different flavors of cube. So there's one targeted specifically at data centers. There's one at public housing, at housing, another one at public buildings, so state-owned buildings, that sort of thing. And then they've started branching off kind of internationally a little bit as well. So originally in French-speaking countries, and then we'd heard about it through our network, and we thought this is a great way to start in the UK. Let's see if we can get it kicked off and going, and build a little bit of momentum. So the French have done a really good job about this. And the next step is, how do you then extend this across the country in terms of the UK, across the world, more importantly, because we think you can probably save 4% of global carbon if all commercial buildings in the world were actually took part in Cube. So it's a matter of trying to expand it a little bit further.
Yeah, which is an extraordinary number, really, 4% globally. And it doesn't get more global than COP, and COP 30 just closed its doors in Belém, Brazil. Does Cube and does this kind of approach to energy efficiency play a role there?
It actually did. So, in terms of playing on a larger global stage, it's really important for us to be there. And we actually use the opportunity to announce the launch of something called the World Championship for Energy Savings. So rather than calling it Cube, it's going to be kind of a World Energy Championship, which has been done in conjunction with the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, which is part of the UN Environment Program. So good global remit. And the idea is to try and find partners, much like us, but try and find partners in different countries around the world who are well positioned to be able to champion this and set this off. The idea being that, no matter where you are around the world, you can take part, you can learn from other people. We're in cold UK most of the time, so a lot of our issues revolve around heating. Whereas if you're in the Middle East, it's going to revolve around air conditioning, have a different series of challenges. So it'd be good to get all that collective knowledge together and just collaborate. So that's really the next step to try and turn this into a global phenomena.
Okay, and the next round of the Cube competition, I understand, kicks off in April next year. If people are listening to this or watching this video, how can they get involved?
I think it'd be as simple as probably just getting in touch with me as a first step, and I can put them in contact with whoever needs to be contacted. So I don't know what the process is for sharing my information, Jono, but feel free to.
Guess we can add that to the show notes. Mark Bruno, thank you very much for your time, a partner at Ampersand Partners and the Chief Ambassador for the Cube competition. Thanks for joining the Smartery podcast today.
Thanks so much.